While getting ready in the morning, Melissa Johnson was organizing her schedule for the day in her mind. Looking at her reflection in the large mirror, she pulled her hair into a ponytail. Melissa's life was proceeding almost according to plan. The morning sunlight streaming through the window of her elegant bedroom reflected off the luxurious furniture, brightening the entire room. "Amy, breakfast is ready," Melissa called toward the stairs. 10-year-old Amy came running down the stairs, still in her pajamas. With bright blue eyes and chestnut hair, Amy was popular at school. "Good morning, Mom," she kissed her mother's cheek and headed to the dining table. In the dining room, Stephen Hunt was already drinking coffee while reading the newspaper. As a successful businessman, he provided Melissa and Amy with a comfortable life. His grayish-dark blonde hair, crystal-clear blue eyes, and perfectly tailored suit attracted attention wherever he went. "Good morning, Princess," Stephen smiled at Amy. "You have a test at school today, don't you?" "Math test. But I'll be fine, I studied everything," Amy answered confidently. "That's my girl," Stephen nodded with satisfaction. "Make sure you get the highest score." Melissa smiled, but felt the weight of expectation in Stephen's words. He was a perfectionist and held Amy to the same high standards. "Don't put too much pressure on her," Melissa gently cautioned. "She's only 10. Stephen narrowed his eyes for a moment but quickly regained his smile. "Of course. I just think it's better to learn early that life is tough." Melissa said nothing. 2 years into her marriage with Stephen, she sometimes felt uneasy about his controlling attitude, but she told herself this was the path she had chosen for Amy's future. After breakfast, Stephen drove off to work in his luxury car. After dropping Amy at school, Melissa headed to a small advertising agency in the suburbs. Her administrative job wasn't particularly stimulating, but the regular hours made it easy to accommodate Amy's school schedule. "It's so helpful not having to pick her up 3 days a week when she has tutoring," her colleague Jane said. "Your daughter is really studious." "Yes, Amy is smart. She says she wants to be a doctor when she grows up," Melissa replied proudly. In the evening, when Melissa returned home from work, Stephen hadn't arrived yet. Amy should have been back from tutoring and doing homework in her room. "Amy, I'm home," Melissa knocked on her daughter's door. The door opened, and Amy appeared. "Mom, welcome home. How was tutoring?" "Same as usual," Amy shrugged. "Math and science, the usual." Melissa kissed Amy's forehead. "I'll make dinner. Stephen called to say he'll be late, so it's just the two of us." That night, Melissa and Amy enjoyed dinner alone together for the first time in a while. Without Stephen present, Amy talked more animatedly and laughed more frequently. The next day, while Melissa was organizing documents at work, the phone rang. "Is this Melissa Johnson?" asked an unfamiliar woman's voice. "Yes, it is. This is Nancy from Oak Hill Library." "I'm the director," the voice continued, calm but concerned. "I'm calling about your daughter, Amy." Melissa frowned. "Did something happen?" "No, nothing major." Nancy paused as if choosing her words carefully. "Your daughter stays at the library until closing almost every night, and I was a bit concerned." "The library?" Melissa was confused. "But Amy goes to tutoring 3 times a week after school." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "Is that so?" "But she comes here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday after school. Often she doesn't leave until we close at 7. Melissa was speechless. Amy had been lying to her. "Your daughter is a wonderful child," Nancy quickly added. "Always polite and reads a lot of books. I was just concerned because she stays so late by herself." "Thank you, Nancy, for letting me know," Melissa took a deep breath. "I'll talk to my daughter tonight." After hanging up, Melissa sank deep into her chair. Why would Amy pretend to go to tutoring but go to the library instead? And if Stephen thought he was paying for tutoring when Amy wasn't actually attending, where was that money going? That evening, when Amy came home from school, Melissa carefully asked, "You have tutoring today, right?" "Yes," Amy answered without making eye contact. "I'll be back at 7. Listening to her daughter's lie, Melissa's heart ached. What was Amy hiding? And did it have something to do with their new life with Stephen? Melissa made up her mind. Tomorrow, she would see for herself where Amy went after school. She needed to know why her daughter was going to the library instead of tutoring. She parked on the street a little distance from the school gate and waited for Amy to come out. She had told Stephen she had urgent work, but she had actually taken a half-day off. At 3:15 p.m., children began streaming out of the school gates. Melissa watched carefully from behind her sunglasses. Amy's small figure appeared with a friend. They parted at the gate, and Amy began walking alone. Melissa started her car only after Amy was far enough ahead, following slowly. Amy was indeed heading in the direction of Jefferson Street where the tutoring center was located. However, she walked right past the building that housed the center and continued walking. Melissa felt her heart beating faster. After about 5 blocks, Amy crossed a large intersection and headed toward a stone building adjacent to a lush green park. Oak Hill Library. Melissa parked on the street, waited for Amy to enter, then headed to the library herself. The interior of the library was quiet and calm. Tall ceilings and wooden bookshelves lined the space, with soft light illuminating the reading corners. Melissa approached a white-haired woman standing at the counter. "Are you Nancy?" The woman looked up, studying Melissa through her glasses. "Yes, I am. I'm Melissa Johnson, Amy's mother. We spoke on the phone yesterday." Nancy's expression softened. "Oh, Melissa. I wasn't expecting you to come in. I was concerned about my daughter." Melissa lowered her voice. "Is she here now?" "Yes, I believe she's in her usual spot." Nancy pointed toward the children's book section. "She's probably with David." "David?" "One of our librarians. He's very good with Amy," Nancy smiled. "They often read history and science books together. He's very knowledgeable and popular with the children." Melissa thanked her, feeling uneasy, and headed toward the children's section. As she made her way between the bookshelves, she heard Amy's voice. "So how is an electron microscope different from a regular microscope?" "An electron microscope uses electrons instead of light," a male voice answered. "That's why it can see much smaller things. You can see tiny structures inside cells." Melissa moved toward the voices and found a large round table. Amy was sitting there, and across from her was a man. With brown hair, a kind smile, and neat clothing, he was pointing to an open science book as he explained something to Amy. The two were so engrossed in their conversation that they didn't notice Melissa. She stood in the shadow of a nearby bookshelf, observing them. Amy's eyes were shining. It had been a long time since Melissa had seen her daughter with such an animated expression. When Amy was with Stephen, she always seemed a bit tense, choosing her words carefully. "David, which book are we going to read next?" Amy asked. The man called David answered with a smile, "You can choose any book you want. But I also brought that book about marine life we were talking about." "Yay! Show me." David took out the book and moved next to Amy to begin turning the pages together. "Look, here are the deep-sea creatures. This fish that produces light attracts prey in the dark deep sea." Melissa felt uncomfortable with the intimacy of their relationship. As a mother, she felt a protective instinct toward her daughter being so familiar with a strange adult. However, she couldn't ignore how happy Amy looked. Returning to the counter, Melissa decided to get more information from Nancy. "How long has David been working here?" "Oh, David Fisher. He's been here for 3 years now, Nancy answered. He's a wonderful librarian. He's especially good with children and explains complex topics in an easy-to-understand way. Fisher. Melissa frowned at the surname. It sounded familiar somehow. How long has he been close with Amy? Let's see. Nancy narrowed her eyes as if searching her memory. About 3 months, I think. When Amy first came alone, she was asking about the book classification system. David explained it carefully, and after that, she started coming every week. Recently, she's been coming 3 times a week. 3 months ago. That coincided with when Stephen decided to send Amy to tutoring. Is David teaching Amy anything special? Special? Nancy tilted her head. He often helps with her homework, and sometimes recommends books based on her interests. She seems particularly interested in science and history. Melissa sighed. On the surface, nothing seemed problematic. But why would Amy lie about going to tutoring to come here? Thank you, Melissa smiled at Nancy. I'll be going now. I won't see Amy today. I plan to talk with her at home. On the way home, Melissa's head was filled with questions. As she prepared dinner, she was thinking about how to bring it up when Stephen returned home. I'm back, Stephen's voice came from the entrance. Welcome home, Melissa answered from the kitchen. Stephen came into the kitchen and kissed Melissa on the cheek. How was your day? We need to talk, Melissa chose her words carefully. About Amy. What's wrong? Problems at school? No, not school. Melissa took a deep breath. Amy hasn't been going to tutoring. She's been going to the library. Stephen's expression changed instantly. What? We're paying good money for that tutoring. Yes, that's why I think we need to discuss it. Discuss. Stephen's voice turned cold. This is just a child's rebellion. She needs proper discipline. But shouldn't we first find out her reasons? Reasons? Stephen snorted. Asking a child for reasons is just coddling. My father was strict, and that's why I succeeded. If Amy is going to succeed in the future, she needs to learn discipline now. Melissa noticed the anger rising in Stephen's eyes. She felt an impulse to step back from where he stood. I'll talk to her, Stephen declared. Tonight, when she gets back. Melissa felt her stomach knot. She had been worried about Stephen's methods of discipline before. He never raised a hand, but his cold, controlling words could sometimes hurt more than violence. I will talk to her, Melissa said firmly. As her mother, I should hear her out first. Stephen stared at Melissa for a long time, then shrugged. Have it your way. But no more coddling. Promise me. I promise. But in her heart, Melissa was resolute. She needed to know what was happening and why Amy was going to the library and spending time with that man. She decided to go back to the library tomorrow. And this time, she intended to speak directly with this David Fisher. The next day, Melissa told Amy, Mom will be a little late from work today, so just do what you normally do, before heading to work. But in reality, she slipped out of the workplace at 3 p.m. and headed to the library a little earlier than the day before. As she pushed open the heavy doors of Oak Hill Library, Melissa's heart was pounding. Unlike yesterday, today she had a plan. First, she would enter the library quietly without greeting Nancy, and wait near where Amy usually sat. The library was slightly busy with after-school children. Melissa hid in the adult literature section, securing a position where she could see the children's corner. A large stone pillar concealed her presence. Soon, Amy's figure appeared at the entrance. Wearing her usual navy backpack, she entered with a slightly tired expression. Melissa held her breath, praying her daughter wouldn't notice her. Amy went straight to the children's corner and placed her belongings on the usual round table. She looked around as if searching for something. Then, her face lit up with a smile. David Fisher was approaching from the bookshelves. "Hey, Amy. You came today too." David's voice was gentle, clearly audible to Melissa. "Hello, David," Amy replied happily. "Will you show me the ocean book again today?" "Of course. But before that, I have something I want to show you." David took something out of his bag. It looked like a small album. He sat next to Amy and opened it. "Remember what we talked about yesterday?" David began in a quiet voice. "About your father." Melissa froze at those words. Amy's father. Why would this librarian know about her first husband, Robert Fisher? "Yes, I remember," Amy answered with a serious expression. "This is the last picture I had." David pointed to a page in the album. "This is your father, Robert." Melissa was stunned. Fisher, so that was it. David was Robert's dad. "Do I look like him?" Amy asked, peering at the photograph. "You look very much like him," David smiled. "Especially the shape of your eyes, and that smile is just like his." Melissa's heart ached as she watched Amy happily gazing at the photo. Robert had disappeared when Amy was 5 years old. Without any explanation, leaving only a letter of apology. Melissa had only told Amy that, "Your father went far away." "Who's this?" Amy pointed at another photo. "That's me," David answered. "And this is your father. This picture was taken before you were born." "You both look so young," Amy laughed. "Yes. I was still in college, and Robert, your father, had already started working. He was a kind person." "Really?" Melissa stood frozen in shock. David Fisher was Robert's brother. She remembered meeting Robert's brother once, before their marriage. But it was only for a short time, and she couldn't even remember his face. Did Dad really disappear? Did he die? Amy's voice grew smaller. David sighed deeply. "Honestly, I don't know. He lost contact 5 years ago. I've been looking for him. That's why I decided to work at this library in Boston." Boston. Now that she could hear their conversation clearly, Melissa understood that David had come to Boston, where they lived, searching for the vanished Robert. "Don't tell Mom," Amy suddenly whispered. "Or Stephen." Melissa's heart nearly stopped. "Why can't we tell them?" David gently asked. Amy shrank a little. "Because Stephen is scary. If I talk about my real dad, he gets really angry." "Scary?" David's voice was tinged with concern. "In what way?" Amy looked around, then continued in a small voice, "When I get a B, he says, you should be able to do better. If I say something wrong, he says, are you stupid?" She faltered. "And when I asked about my real dad, he said, forget about that man. He gets so angry." Melissa gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. She knew Stephen was strict with Amy, but to speak to her daughter that way when she wasn't around. "That's why I pretend to go to tutoring but come here instead," Amy continued. "I can't tell Mom. She chose Stephen, so..." At those words, tears welled up in Melissa's eyes. Did Amy think she was betraying her mother? "Amy," David said with a serious expression. "Your mom loves you. I'm sure she would understand. But she said she married Stephen for my sake. Because he has money, and I can go to a good school." Melissa leaned against the stone pillar. Her legs were shaking. Everything was becoming clear. Amy was afraid of Stephen. And she had been going to the library to meet David, Robert's brother, because she wanted to know about her real father. "The reason I'm here is for you and Robert," David said quietly. "Robert always cared about you. There must be," a reason why he disappeared. Do you think we'll find him? Amy's eyes shone with hope. I don't know, David answered honestly. But I don't intend to give up. Melissa tried to step out from behind the pillar to approach them, but her feet wouldn't move forward. The shock was too great, and she was confused about how to respond, to Amy's fear of Stephen, to the appearance of Robert's brother, and most of all, to her own failure to notice these things. With trembling legs, Melissa quietly left the library. Back in her car, she cried with her forehead against the steering wheel. She felt overwhelmed by helplessness and guilt. But as she wiped away her tears, a strong resolve was born. Tonight, when Amy came home, she would have an honest talk as a mother. And tomorrow, she needed to meet with David Fisher to learn the whole truth. Above all, she needed to reconsider her relationship with Stephen. A home where Amy lived in fear was not what she had wanted. Melissa took a deep breath and started the car. She wasn't ready to go home yet, but she had to be strong for her daughter. The next morning, after dropping Amy off at school, Melissa headed back to the library. Nancy had told her it was an early opening day. Melissa intended to meet David and reveal everything. When she entered the library, there were still few patrons, and the interior was wrapped in silence. Nancy wasn't at the counter, instead, a young woman stood there. Is David Fisher available? Melissa asked. Yes, I think he's in the office in the back, the woman answered kindly. Would you like me to call him? Thank you. Please do. A few minutes later, David appeared. When he saw Melissa, his expression changed. He seemed to immediately understand who she was. Melissa, he said quietly. I'm glad to meet you. I need to talk with you, Melissa said directly. About Amy, and about Robert. David nodded and said, let's talk in the staff room, guiding her to a small conference room. When they sat facing each other, there was a moment of silence. I heard your conversation with Amy yesterday, Melissa began frankly. I know you're Robert's brother, and I also know that Amy is afraid of Stephen. David sighed deeply. I'll explain everything. Why didn't you come to me directly? Melissa's voice contained a hint of accusation. That was my initial intention, David answered honestly. But when I accidentally met Amy, I learned that she was afraid of your new husband. I feared causing trouble in your home by meeting you directly. So you met with my daughter in secret? Yes. At first, I just helped her find books in the library. She's a smart child, David smiled. And as we talked more, she realized I was Robert's brother. She had seen pictures of Robert and noticed the similarities between us. Melissa sat back deeply in her chair. What do you know about Robert? Is he alive? And David looked straight into Melissa's eyes. At least, he was 3 years ago. Melissa's heart leaped. 3 years ago. After he disappeared, he traveled abroad. I continued looking for him and found traces of him in Mexico 3 years ago. But that was the last. Why did he leave us? The question she had harbored for years finally escaped her lips. David shook his head apologetically. I don't fully understand. He had problems. He seemed to believe he wasn't worthy of supporting a family. And from his desire not to cause trouble for you and Amy. What a foolish man, Melissa said, fighting back tears. Actually. David hesitated. Shortly before Robert disappeared, he told me, if anything happens to me, please protect Melissa and Amy. So you sought us out? Yes. I came to Boston and started working at the library. The librarian profession is well suited for gathering information, David smiled wryly. But when I learned you had married Stephen Hunt, I wasn't sure how to approach you. And then by chance, Amy came to the library. Is what Amy said about Stephen true? Melissa asked fearfully. David's face clouded over. Yes. Amy is emotionally cornered. Stephen doesn't seem to use direct violence, but he uses words that damage her self-esteem. He demands too much perfection. Guilt spread through Melissa's chest. She knew the relationship between Amy and her new father was awkward, but she hadn't realized it was this serious. I'll talk with Stephen tonight, Melissa said with determination in her voice. And if necessary, I will support you, David said seriously. For Amy's sake too. After a moment's hesitation, Melissa made a decision. David, could you come to our house tonight? At 7. Let's talk together with Amy and Stephen. Back at home, Melissa rehearsed words in her mind as she prepared dinner. When Stephen returned home, she said quietly, I've invited a guest for tonight at 7. Amy's relative. Stephen frowned. Relative? Who? David Fisher. Amy's uncle. The color drained from Stephen's face. Fisher. That good-for-nothings. Stephen, Melissa interrupted him. I went to the library. I know Amy is afraid of Stephen. A tense atmosphere filled the room. Stephen, trying to control his anger, said in a low voice, I'm just being strict for her own good. The world isn't kind. There's a difference between strictness and hurting someone, Melissa said firmly. Dinner proceeded in silence. Amy, sensing the tension between the adults, hardly spoke. At exactly 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. When Melissa opened the door, David was standing there. Dressed in a suit, he looked more imposing than she had expected. Please, come in, Melissa invited him. In the living room, Stephen stood with his arms crossed, and Amy sat in the corner of the sofa. Stephen, this is David Fisher, Melissa introduced them. Nice to meet you, Mr. Hunt, David said politely. What do you want? Stephen asked coldly. I'm Robert's brother, David answered directly. I'm Amy's uncle. I recently met her. That man's brother, Stephen sneered. What are you here for? Money? Stephen. Melissa scolded. Maintaining his composure, David said, I heard that Amy was avoiding tutoring and coming to the library to escape the pressure you put on her. Stephen's face turned red. What? Don't interfere in my family matters. Amy, Melissa turned to her daughter. Tell us the truth. What does Stephen say to you? After looking at Stephen with a frightened expression, Amy said in a small voice, he gets angry when I'm not perfect. He often says, are you stupid? A heavy silence fell over the room. Then, suddenly, Amy stood up and ran to her room. When she returned, she had a small tablet in her hand. I recorded it, she held out the tablet with trembling hands. What Stephen said when Mom was at work. Melissa took the tablet and pressed play. Stephen's shouting voice echoed in the room, useless daughter. A fool like you will never amount to anything in the future. As she listened to the recording, Melissa's anger peaked. Get out, she told Stephen. Get out of this house right now. You must be joking, Stephen scoffed, but anxiety flickered in his eyes. This house is mine. I'll contact a lawyer tomorrow, Melissa said calmly. I'm starting divorce proceedings. Stephen trembled with rage but recognized the firmness in Melissa's resolve. He threw down his keys and stormed out of the house in anger. In the room that had returned to silence, Melissa embraced Amy. I'm sorry. I didn't notice. It's okay, Mom, Amy cried on her mother's shoulder. David stood a little distance away, watching over them. Melissa directed grateful eyes toward him. 1 month after Stephen left, on a Saturday, Melissa and Amy were organizing belongings in their new apartment. Unable to keep up with the mortgage payments, they had just moved from Stephen's large house to a cozy 2-story apartment. Mom, where should I put this box? Amy asked, carrying a large cardboard box. Next to the bookshelf is fine, Melissa answered with a smile. Let's put the books in the living room. The doorbell rang, and Amy ran to answer it. Uncle David, she exclaimed joyfully. David stood there with a paper bag in one hand and an old album in the other. I brought pizza and ice cream to celebrate your move. Yay! Amy happily accepted the paper bag and rushed to the kitchen. Melissa smiled kindly at David. Thank you, that helps. You're welcome, he said as he entered the room. This is a lovely apartment. It feels bright and warm. Yes, it's not big, but it's enough for us. During this month, David had continued to support them through the divorce proceedings and the move. Stephen initially contested the property division, but after learning about Amy's recording, he agreed to proceed amicably. Apparently, he was having problems at his company and no longer had the capacity to deal with Melissa and Amy. The three sat on the living room sofa and opened the album David had brought. It contained photographs of Robert and David in their younger days. This is a photo from when Robert graduated from college, David pointed to one picture. He was always bright and made everyone around him smile. I want to be like Dad, Amy said, gazing at the photo. You already resemble him, Melissa gently stroked her daughter's hair. Especially in your curiosity and compassionate heart. David opened the last page of the album. A letter was tucked in there. This is the last letter Robert sent me, he said quietly. Would you like to read it? After a moment's hesitation, Melissa nodded. David unfolded the letter and began reading Robert's words. If anything happens to me, please protect Melissa and Amy. I made the mistake of running away from my own weakness. But someday, I want to return and make amends for everything. Tears welled up in Amy's eyes. Will Dad really come back? I don't know, Melissa answered honestly. But you have a wonderful uncle. And we are together. A year later, on a spring day, the three were enjoying a picnic in the city park. Melissa and David's relationship had gradually changed from friendship. His kindness and sincerity had been healing Melissa's emotional wounds. Amy had begun to shine at school and had started volunteering at the library. Library director Nancy occasionally visited their new home, saying, I'm so glad I called that day. That night, when Melissa went to Amy's room to say goodnight, Amy took out a small box from under her bed. I've been keeping this safe, she said as she opened it, revealing a photo of Robert along with a letter he had supposedly written. It contained a promise, I will definitely return someday. Melissa and Amy embraced, looking out the window. A full moon shone in the night sky. Somewhere, Robert might be looking at the same moon. What do you think family is? Amy suddenly asked. It's not just blood ties, Melissa smiled. It's cherishing and protecting each other. That's what real family is. From the living room, David gently watched the two standing by the window. Their new story had only just begun.